With the jobs support scheme ending for most sectors after today, will businesses survive without wage subsidies?
Singapore aims to contribute millions of dollars to help low-income countries cope with the pandemic.
And experts say COVID-19 vaccines that are inhaled could be more effective in preventing transmission.
You're watching The Big Story, coming to you live from the Straits Times newsroom. I'm Olivia Quay.
I'm Harian Tudiman. You can subscribe to the Straits Times channel so you never miss a single episode.
Now, news just in a letter to Singapore's MUFTI, the highest Islamic authority here, Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong said the government fully appreciates the growing socio-religious significance of the tudung to Muslim Singaporeans and the desire of some Muslim nurses to don it with their uniform.
He added that the government is presently considering how this can be done. PM Lee also noted in the letter that the delicate balance that considers the interests of all communities is dynamic. As younger generations of Singaporeans grow up and attitudes change, new issues and pressures arise. And he said these must be addressed taking into account Singapore's context. Any change that is made must be carefully considered and gradual.
Well, PM Lee also acknowledged MUIS's efforts in helping to build the racial and religious harmony here, noting the organization's outreach to the Christian and Jewish communities to maintain the social harmony in the face of terrorist threats.
And in a reply today, Mufti Naziruddin Nasir wrote that MUIS is assured that the government can see reasons why Muslim nurses can wear the tudung if they choose to do so, and noted that a decision will be made when discussions with stakeholders on this matter are concluded.
Dr. Naziruddin also said that the organization fully supports the government's secular and neutral stance in treating various religious groups evenly, while it consults the community and considers the impact of its policies on society. Look out for more on this at straitstimes.com.
In other news, today is the last day of Jobs Support Scheme payouts for all companies except those in hard-hit sectors.
That's right. So for this month, firms in these 4 tiers that you'll see shortly will still receive payouts. But as you can see in the next tranche scheduled for June, industries classified under Tier 3B will not get any more wage subsidies under the JSS.
Tier 3B includes biomedical sciences, electronics, financial services, information and communications technology, media, postal and courier, online retail, as well as supermarkets and convenience stores. They are less affected by the pandemic than most other sectors, so JSS support was only provided to cover wages up to December 2020.
The Vice President of the Association of Small and Medium Enterprises weighs in.
In the last few months, we have seen in many sectors, right, the return of demand, and what it really means is that for many SMEs, we are seeing a uptick in demand, and in certain sectors like the local F&B, we are seeing some SMEs even report demand exceeding what was pre-COVID levels, because people cannot travel, they have to kind of consume locally, right? I think that in this view, a lot of our industries are prepared for the ending of JSS, and the government has been tapering off JSS and having quite adequate communication, and of course there is the JGI and also SG United that comes in terms of helping SMEs grow and expand. I think there is a small number of sectors that are still very badly hit, right? I think this is a very real issue, because if you are in the conference and you are in the travel sector, there's still not going to be that number of tourists. I think that sector will still continue to suffer. The rest, I think it's very okay, and the SMEs have time to actually adapt.
Meanwhile, about 27,000 employers hired about 130,000 locals in the first 3 months after the launch of the Jobs Growth Incentive last year. Each employer hired a median of 2 locals from September to November, up from a median of 1 local hire in the same period in 2019. 99% of the employers were SMEs, and about 6 in 10 of them hired 1 to 2 local workers each. The remaining 4 hired more.
Students, job seekers, working professionals, educators and small business owners can now learn digital marketing skills for free through an initiative by Facebook. Launched today, Upskill with Facebook Singapore will train about 2,700 people and 1,000 SMEs in areas like marketing science, social media marketing and content creation. The training will be provided through 4 programs with input by Facebook and industry experts.
Singapore aims to contribute $27.7 million to support low-income countries cope with the economic fallout from COVID-19. Subject to Parliament's approval, it will go towards supporting 3 initiatives by the International Monetary Fund. $19.6 million will come from the Monetary Authority of Singapore's official foreign reserves.
An update on the COVID-19 situation here. 1 community case was among the 34 new infections confirmed today.
Today's count is the 2nd straight day of recent highs. The remaining 33 cases were imported and had been placed on stay-home notices or isolated when they arrived.
Meanwhile, as of March 29th, more than 375,600 people have been fully vaccinated against COVID-19.
The fear of an injection or the needle itself is real for some people, and this may be a hurdle for them in getting the COVID-19 vaccine. Now, other methods of administering the vaccine are currently being explored, like through the nose.
Well, in Singapore, homegrown biotech firm Esco Ester is working with a US company to develop a vaccine to be delivered as a nasal spray. The firm's chief executive said the chimeric vaccine, made by merging proteins from different viruses, is currently undergoing animal studies. Meanwhile, last Thursday, Oxford University said it's launching a study of immune responses of a nasal administration of its vaccine developed with AstraZeneca. And last week, China approved an inhaled vaccine for clinical trials.
Infectious diseases experts here told the Straits Times that COVID-19 vaccines, which are administered through the nose and mouth, could potentially be more effective in blocking the virus at the upper respiratory tract and reducing its transmission. But they stressed that the safety and efficacy of such vaccines still have to be proven in clinical trials.
Well, Professor Wee Eng Yong from the Emerging Infectious Diseases Program at Duke NUS Medical School noted that there are currently no licensed nasally delivered vaccines in Singapore.
But there are licensed oral vaccines like the liquid polio vaccine and typhoid vaccine that comes in pill form. We're pleased to have Professor Wee with us now to share more. Professor, nasal vaccines have been under development for decades. What's the general sentiment of the global medical community? Are researchers taking it seriously, or is it a newfangled innovation?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me. The nasal vaccine and oral vaccine, what they can do that cannot be done through an injection, is that they can stimulate the immune response in the mucosa. So, in other words, in the lining of the airway, in the gut, right? And so, therefore, when we encounter these viruses when we inhale them or when we ingest them, then the immune response will be more effective in blocking infection. And hence the spread of the virus in our body. Whereas if you were to give the vaccine via a needle into the muscle, then you essentially will develop good immune response, but it's now trying to block the spread. So here you have a chance of blocking the actual infection right in the outset. And because of that, there's a greater chance that we can therefore completely eliminate any infection at all. And therefore would not allow the virus to even infect someone who's been vaccinated, but remain asymptomatic, because then that person could potentially spread the virus. So the chance of herd immunity increases with mucosal delivered vaccine. Right.
Then, Prof, having said that, and I guess the usefulness of this type of, nasal vaccine, do you think that the medical community globally, is taking this seriously, as we asked before, or is it being considered still, an innovation that's relatively new?
I think people are taking it seriously, but of course there are issues associated with delivering the vaccine, especially nasally. I mean, imagine if you were to spray something into your nose, very often you will sneeze because it will irritate the the lining of our nose. And if that happens when you're being given a vaccine, then if you sneeze out part of the vaccine, then effectively you have reduced the dose that you will be given, right, or that you will have received. And that may lead to poorer quality immune response, and it defeats purpose of what we want to achieve with the vaccine. So obviously there needs to be proper trials to look at what proportion of people will actually sneeze depending on how it's delivered, or other things, right, or whether it triggers a flow of mucus and stuff like that could wash the vaccine out as well. So there are a lot of practical issues that need to be tested and overcome before this vaccine can be applied widely in the normal population.
Now, we know that these types of vaccines are still undergoing clinical trials, but Professor, weighing the pros and cons, on one hand, nasal vaccines are easier to administer. On the other hand, they are uncommon. When it comes to countering vaccination hesitation, how will nasal vaccines fare in the take-up rate, you think?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's one of those things that we probably have to evaluate in the real world setting. For instance, there are two kinds of anti-influenza drug, right? The one that we know very well is Tamiflu. That's the one that you swallow, but that's actually another drug that you give directly into the nose. It's called Relenza. And actually, in terms of the lab studies between the two, Relenza actually works better than Tamiflu, but nobody hears about Relenza. Everyone knows about Tamiflu because people prefer to swallow their medicine rather than have it sprayed into their nose. So at the end of the day, it could come down to that, right? What actually people prefer. So of course, the thinking is that, needle cause pain. Some people are afraid of needles, and therefore something that's sprayed into the nose may, be more more widely accepted than a needle, but that may not necessarily be the case, right? That actually, at the end of the day, some may say, hey, I'll take the pain rather than all the sneezing and all the runny nose and all that you might get with a nasally delivered vaccine. I think the orally delivered vaccine is probably the easiest because you just swallow it. But remember, the vaccine now has to pass through the stomach, which is very acidic, before it can get to the small intestines, where perhaps it will then meet the immune system and generate the right responses. So it must be stable enough to get through that low acidic environment in our stomach. So again, that's a big challenge in how you would deliver a vaccine like that into the intestine. So there are challenges to overcome. It's not that straightforward for a vaccine like COVID.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Ooi. Always a pleasure to have you on the show, of course. We've been speaking to Professor Ooi Eng Yong from the Emerging Infectious Diseases Program at Duke NUS Medical School.
According to the World Economic Forum's 2021 Global Gender Gap Report, the COVID-19 pandemic has rolled back years of progress towards equality between men and women.
To reach gender parity on areas like education, health, economic opportunity and political empowerment will now take an average of about 135 years. Now, this is 36 years longer than what last year's report indicated.
The Straits Times speak to Saadia Zahidi, the WEF's managing director.
Globally, across the world, it's clear that the world has largely closed health-related gender gaps. Largely, the world has closed education-related gender gaps, but of course that depends. If you go to certain parts of South Asia, that looks very different than certain parts of East Asia when it comes to the education gender gap. So there's still obviously countries that need to catch up quite a bit in terms of girls' and women's education. But largely speaking, around the world, the trend is a very positive one on health and education. Where there's a major concern is that economic participation was something that was already not doing well relative to how talented and skilled women already are. For example, in most parts of the world, women make up a larger set of the students in universities than men do. So we have the talent base, and that has been a trend that's existed for at least a decade. So we have the talent base, and the newly incoming high-skilled workforce of the world is actually more female than it is male. But they're not getting the same opportunities in the workplace. And that's where there would be a concern about losses. And that is where business can really step up and set the frame for a more equal direction. And it's important for them. That is where diversity, creativity, ideas, innovation will come from, by having a more diverse workforce. And on the government side, there's two elements of that. There's policymaking that has to apply a gender lens, but there's also the representation of women in politics itself. And that's where there's also the second gap that we measure in the index. And for most parts of the world, the political gender gap is the area of biggest concern.
Well, Singapore is ranked 54th out of 156 countries, almost attaining equality in educational attainment as well as health and survival. Our lowest scoring area was political empowerment.
Overall, the Nordic countries once again dominated the top of the table, with the gender gap narrowest in Iceland for the 12th year running, followed by Finland and Norway. New Zealand took 4th place.
The second black box of the ill-fated Sriwijaya Air jet has been recovered. The cockpit voice recorder, which could have data crucial to what happened before the crash, will be taken to a lab for data processing, which is expected to take 3 days to a week. Initial investigations disclosed last month revealed there was a problem with the plane's throttle control that led to the plane crash that killed 62 people on board.
Next month's Oscars ceremony will reportedly include venues in Britain and France for international nominees unable to travel to Los Angeles. Oscars presenters will remain at the main LA location, and video calling will still be kept to a minimum. Under previous plans that came under fire, all nominees would have been required to travel to California despite potential travel risks and restrictions and lengthy quarantine requirements, all face being left out of the show entirely.
You know, we've probably posted our fair share of wrong messages on our personal messaging or social media accounts, but heaven forbid, right? What if a similar accident happens on an official work account?
And not just any work account, but the US's powerful nuclear weapons force. Now, this happened on the US Strategic Command's Twitter page, where this now deleted tweet was posted. Turns out it was posted by the child of the organization's social media editor, who was working from home. So, no, it wasn't a nuclear launch code or a cyber attack.
Well, before we go, we are seeing some relaxation in some COVID-19 curbs in religious activities released just a few minutes ago.
For instance, from next Monday, April 5th, those involved in or supporting the conduct of the worship service will be allowed to sing while masked within the prevailing cap of 30 persons.
Singing by the congregation will also be permitted to resume, of course, with safe management measures in place. You can visit straitstimes.com for more details, as well as for more news and videos, and subscribe to our YouTube channel by hitting the red button below.
Once again, I'm Harian Tudiman with Olivia Quay. Join us tomorrow for more stories on A Big Story.